Good evening, Knoxville College family and friends. I want to welcome you all to our evening symposium, and we have a special treat for you this evening. Today, we're really going to talk a little bit. We're going to settle in a little bit closer to home today. And so we have a home product of East Tennessee who's going to be here with us in a few seconds, and I'm going to go ahead and make this brilliant introduction and to introduce our guest for this evening. Our guest is Dr. Brittany Mosby, who is the director of the Historically Black College and University Success Program and Initiatives for the Tennessee Higher Education Commission. And the state of Tennessee was actually the first state to focus solely on our HBCUs, and this is in our both public and private arena. And so Dr. Mosby, as a part of her duties, develops programs and policies and partnerships to help with the success of all of our HBCU students across this fine state. Prior to that, she was right here in Knoxville, working as a associate professor of mathematics at Pellissippi State Community College, and she was also she chaired statistics and curriculum design, and she's a grant writer, and she secured some money for a lot of her faculty and for her program. And so she is a HBCU grad herself, a third generation graduate of the Spelman College, located in Atlanta, Georgia. And so I'm going to say she earned her doctorate from Vanderbilt University, and she also has a master's degree from Carnegie Mellon University. So this is a well-educated, well-versed, well-spoken, pleasant individual to be around. She is my little sister. I have adopted her. She is my little sister all the way around. It has been a pleasure to know her. It is a pleasure to see her in action and know that we do have a true advocate for our HBCUs here in the state of Tennessee in Dr. Mosby. And so it is without any delay, it is my honor, my privilege to introduce to you all this evening Dr. Brittany Mosby. Brittany, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Lindsay, for that such a warm welcome. And I am always glad and happy to get together with you and to celebrate Knoxville College. Being a hometown girl, this is my hometown school, and Knoxville College is close to me, close to my heart. My mother grew up in the shadow of Knoxville College over off Magnolia Avenue, and a school that I've always held dear. So I'm tremendously honored to be here tonight with you to talk a little bit about the state of Tennessee's HBCUs and their future direction as we look at 2020 and beyond. So let's get started. I'd like to begin with a quick look. One of the first questions on everyone's mind is, how are the HBCUs doing in the midst of this pandemic? What is the current situation at our HBCUs and how are they holding on? So on this next slide, I have a look at the current operations on campus for this fall semester. So several of the campuses have decided to go virtual only, including American Baptist, of course, Knoxville College, and Lemoyne-Owen College, offering only online classes for their students with some in-person options at Lemoyne-Owen for certain classes. This decision was made based on being in those metro areas and having trends, for example, in Memphis and Shelby County that really caused them to hold back on bringing students to campus. Beyond that, FISC had a hybrid plan where their first-year students were on campus. So campus was about 50% capacity with those first-year students there for the first 7 weeks, the first half of the semester. And then they moved out. Upperclassmen moved onto campus for the second 7 weeks or the second half of the semester, with students alternating between online and in-person classes in between. Tennessee State also started virtually, and then after the Labor Day holiday transitioned to in-person classes with virtual options for those students who opted into it. And then finally, Meharry Medical College, which has remained open and in person throughout the entire spring, summer, and now fall semester, of course, being a central hub for the Middle Tennessee community as a testing site and also an information site for the pandemic. On the next slide, we can take a look at the enrollment trends. So in addition to campus operations, at the top of our mind, at the forefront of our mind during this pandemic season is how the transition has affected enrollments for those HBCUs. And unfortunately, like we see in other sectors, including the community colleges and the four-year universities and colleges across the state, HBCUs have also experienced a significant decline in their overall enrollment. In fact, of the institutions reporting data to iPads, we see almost a 800 student drop in total enrollment across the state, with American Baptist, Lane, Lemoyne-Owen, and Tennessee State University all seeing significant drops in their student population. This data for the fall semester is currently tentative. This is our first look at the effects of the pandemic on the HBCUs across the state. Our next slide has this in graphic form. So comparing Tennessee HBCUs that are private and then the public institution, TSU, you can see overall, most schools had experienced an upward tick in enrollment for fall 2019, something that was reflected across the nation with an overall trend upwards in HBCU first year enrollment. However, unfortunately, those trends were reversed for the most part across all of the institutions. As you can see, overall total headcount enrollment falling for almost all of the institutions with the exception of 2. The next slide here has this in terms of percent change, and you can see the effects that it has by institution. So ABC, American Baptist College in Nashville, taking the largest percent change in their fall to fall tuition total head count, lost a total just over 40% of their students from last year to this year as a result of the pandemic. Next, Lane and Lemoyne-Owen, each with a decrease of about 20% of their student body, representing about 400 students across those two institutions. And TSU with a dip of about 600 students from fall to fall semesters. Fisk and Meharry did see slight increases, about a 5% increase at Fisk University and about a 7% increase at Meharry Medical College. We are currently looking into those trends upward to see what caused those and if those can be replicated. However, if you look at the overall enrollment in Tennessee HBCUs across the state, there is of students, something that we in higher education will be monitoring closely as this pandemic continues and as we look forward to 2021 and how we're going to bounce back both as a community and as an economy from the effects of this pandemic. So that concludes our quick look at sort of the right now picture of HBCUs. And I'd like to transition now on this next slide sort of into our regularly scheduled content. So from here, I'd like to give an overview of higher education in Tennessee and then talk a little bit about where HBCU success fits into this higher education picture, and then what we do on a daily basis at THEC to promote success among our HBCU institutions. So to begin with, the landscape of higher education in Tennessee can be thought of in two major buckets. There are private institutions, which include our community colleges, the UT system, and the regional universities, including Austin Peay, East Tennessee State University, Middle Tennessee State University, and the University of Memphis. The private institutions, on the other hand, are those that are not directly funded by the state for operational budgets. And those include what we call the exempt institutions, and those are institutions that are regionally accredited by SAC-COC or some other similar regional accrediting body. And then the non-exempt institutions are those institutions that have other forms of authorization or accreditation, and those are regulated by the THEC, Department of Post-Secondary Authorization. On the next slide, we see that HBCUs live at the intersection of all of these institutions. Tennessee's HBCUs are comprised of both public and private schools, as well as exempt and non-exempt institutions. And so HBCUs truly lie at the intersection and the crossroads of higher education in Tennessee. And what's beautiful about the different sectors of higher education is that students are allowed to pick the school and the fit that matches best for them. And so with this intersection of institutions, we can see HBCUs have a little bit of something for everyone. And so to that point, HBCUs, Tennessee is the only state to have a full-time higher education agency that is dedicated to ensuring the success of all of its HBCUs across all of those sectors, both public, private, exempt, and non-exempt institutions. It is our job at the Higher Education Agency to ensure that all of our HBCUs have some measure of success. The organizational structure of our higher education body looks a little something like this. We have a THEC board that is appointed by the governor, and that board is the regulating body for our organizational structure. An executive director leads the 5 main bureaus of the Higher Education Commission, including academic affairs, finance, administration, legal and external affairs, our policy and research arm, student and compliance aid. HBCU success falls particularly under the Student Success and Academic Affairs Bureau. And so where I live and where I focus my efforts are on those student success initiatives and those academic affairs initiatives, making sure that our HBCUs are operating at the height of their capacity. Broadly speaking, the mission statement of the Tennessee Higher Education Commission is to remain relentlessly focused on increasing the number of Tennesseans with a post-secondary credential, which means that we are all working towards the ultimate goal of seeing all Tennesseans, regardless of race, color, age, or creed, with an appropriate post-secondary credential, whether that's a bachelor's degree, master's degree, a certificate, in fields that are relevant and meaningful to grow the economy and the overall prosperity of all citizens in Tennessee. On our next slide, a little bit about the responsibilities of THEC in a broad stroke sense. We craft and we set the state policy priorities for higher education. That includes developing a statewide master plan for public higher education, and then also setting completion goals for all institutions of public higher education. THEC is responsible for approving and reviewing academic programs at the public institutions, as well as the fiscal affairs and the budget affairs for all of public higher education. That includes developing budget recommendations, setting tuition ranges for those public institutions, and prioritizing capital project proposals for the public institutions across the state. We are also deeply involved in data, both maintaining reporting and analysis for state student data to various constituencies and stakeholders. And then finally, consumer protection for those students. We monitor and approve those non-exempt institutions and also administer and regulate veterans education benefits. on the whole for the state. On the next slide, specifically then, is what falls under the responsibilities for THEC with respect to the HBCU Success Initiative. So this is written into statute. And so Tennessee, again, leading the country, being the only state, the first state to have something written in its statute, written in law, that the HBCU Success Initiative will be responsible for strengthening the capacity of historically Black colleges and universities in order for them to provide the highest quality education, in order for them to increase opportunities to participate in and benefit from state programs, and finally, ensuring that Tennessee has the the highest proportion of college graduates from HBCUs in the country, something that we are committed to at the Tennessee Higher Education Commission. And in my role as the director of HBCU Success, I am also committed to ensuring the statutory goals are met. So on the next slide, what I have are sort of the main buckets of my job as director of HBCU Success for the state of Tennessee. Been doing this for about 3 years now, and we have really developed a strategic approach to ensuring the success of our institutions. And broadly, what I do is I work to advocate for and pursue equity in all state policies and programs on behalf of Tennessee's historically Black institutions. And that usually falls into one of 3 main buckets: through research and analysis of existing state data and collecting new data to help spread the narrative of HBCU success, their students, staff, and faculty. Developing new and innovative programming for HBCUs in order to benefit from the whole collaborative of the institutions working together. And then finally, through convening, bringing together various stakeholders and constituencies to ensure that the right people are at the table when we are talking about the success of higher education and specifically the success of Tennessee's HBCUs. On our next slide are the 3 main state priorities for higher education in 2020 and beyond. One of the responsibilities for the state higher education agency is to set those policy priorities for all of higher education and what this is going to look like moving forward into this new decade of decision and into this new decade of the 21st century where we are dealing not only with a global pandemic and changes in social justice and social unrest, but also a burgeoning technology divide that's being highlighted in equities. So our priorities fall into 3 categories. We are working to ensure student success on all levels. That includes academic readiness from K-12, ensuring that all students have the classes that they need in order to be successful once they get to higher education. That includes access across a broad spectrum of higher education sectors, from community colleges, technical colleges, and 4-year schools, making sure that students have access to the school that is the right fit for them. And then finally, on the other end of that, making sure that the pipeline from K-12 through college all leads to completion, leads to higher graduation rates, higher success rates for students, so that they are benefiting maximally from these credentials and degrees that they're obtaining while they are in school. The next higher education priority falls under family prosperity. So with this, we are looking at the affordability of higher education, making sure that it is an attainable and a reachable option for all students, regardless of their economic and their socioeconomic status and background. making sure that higher education has full transparency when it comes to setting tuition and fees and understanding the value of that degree and the value of the credential that students are working towards and obtaining. And then finally, ensuring outreach to adults, learning that higher education is changing, it's looking different. And not only do students coming out of K-12 need higher education, but also adults who want to return to school to increase their earnings potential, to increase their socioeconomic status, making sure that adults feel welcome on campus and that they feel that there are options for them to return in order to increase and to further their family's prosperity through higher education across the state. And then finally, the last priority, and perhaps the most important priority, is making sure that higher education is aligned to the future workforce. Gone are the days where students can just go to college without a clear purpose in mind. We want to make sure that every experience that students have in college is getting them closer to their goals on the other side, and that includes preparing them for what the future of work looks like, making sure that higher education includes all sorts of opportunities from technology to industrial to career and technical experiences for those students, and making sure that classwork is aligned to real work and meaningful problems. So that includes career and technical education, things like welding, HVAC repair, those high demand jobs, those high paying jobs, and including work-based learning within higher education. So no longer solely focusing on esoteric pursuits, but ensuring that students are receiving credits for work-based experience, but also getting the experience they need to take them farther in their jobs and in their careers. So on our next slide, it begs the question, it brings us to this point. So what does success mean for HBCUs in Tennessee? So Tennessee, with its 7 HBCUs across the state from Knoxville to Memphis, how do we define success for our institutions in particular? And how do we drill down? How do we drill through data? How do we look at the numbers? And how do we ensure that the students that are coming to our institutions are receiving that high quality education, that we are graduating those students, and they are going on to jobs that are both prosperous and economically beneficial for themselves and their families? So first, what I want to do is take a look at some data. My favorite thing to do, and one of the most important things that we can do as a community in support of our HBCUs, is to look at the data, to look at what's happening at our HBCUs, and to explain why it's happening and where to go from here. So on this slide, what we have is a graph that shows the graduation rate for all Tennessee four-year institutions, and also the percentage of students that are Pell eligible across these institutions. Now, if you look at this graph, you will see that there is a downhill trend moving across this graph from left to right. Our points are showing us, our data points are showing us that overall, those schools that have the highest graduation rates also correspond to those schools that have the smallest percentage or the fewest number of Pell eligible and low income students. And furthermore, on this next transition, these data points that are circled here at the end of the graph, these are our HBCUs. These 5 points here, these circled points, show that Tennessee's HBCUs not only are at the far end, meaning they enroll the highest percentage of those Pell eligible low income students, but also that they are working the hardest out of any of the four-year institutions across the state. So What this means is that when we look at the graduation rates, particularly for our HBCUs, when someone says that HBCUs have low graduation rates, we have to counter that narrative with the fact that HBCUs are also doing more, they're working harder than any other school in the state. As you can see, the graduation rates are the lowest at this far end of the spectrum. And that's reflected by the fact that those low income students are often at risk in other ways. They're often coming in with less academic preparation. They're often coming in with lower test scores, and they're often coming in with bigger gaps in knowledge. So HBCUs are the hardworking institutions in the state when you look at not only graduation rates, but who is going to the institutions. And on the next slide, if you overlay this graph with a comparison of the graduation rates and then the graduation rates of just the Black students, you will see this disparity is highlighted even more. So on this second scatter plot, what we have, the red dots represent the graduation rate of the total student body, and the dark blue dots show the graduation rates of just the Black students. So not only is there a downhill trend from left to right, showing that schools with a greater proportion of low income students also have to work harder to graduate those students, we also see that even the schools with the best graduation rates, their Black students are still graduating disproportionately fewer than the other and the rest of the student body. So this is a problem. Graduation rates are a problem that are compounded both by income, socioeconomic status, and by race. And our HBCUs are dealing with the largest proportion of these. Demographically speaking, our HBCUs have a larger share of those Black students, of the Black population, and they have a larger share of those low income and Pell eligible students. So what we are seeing in both of these graphs is that our HBCUs are actually doing an extraordinarily well, an extraordinarily great job graduating students that other institutions would not be able to graduate because of the large disparities and the large gaps, both for income and for race. So this is a look at the student success across Tennessee's four-year institutions. Let's also take a look at the financial picture for students across Tennessee's four-year institutions. So on this next slide, what we have are some bar graphs that show not only are HBCUs dealing with graduation rates at varying levels, but also student financial aid at varying levels. So our first cluster of graphs here show the percentage of students across HBCUs and traditionally white institutions, both public and private, the percentage of students who received any type of grant aid. So this includes institutional scholarships, state scholarships like the Hope Scholarship, as well as federal dollars like the Pell Grant. But this is all grant aid that students do not need to pay back. So these first four bar graphs tell us that whether you are at an HBCU or a traditionally white institution, about the same amount of students are getting grant aid. About the same amount of students across all these institutions qualify for scholarships. However, if you break it down by type of scholarship, again, disparities are highlighted across student bodies, across demographics. So like I said before, the Pell Grant Award, the federal Pell Grant Award, is awarded to students whose family income is below a certain level. Typically, it falls around $36,000 or less. So the first two bars in this middle graph show us that HBCUs have a higher percentage of students who fall into that low income category as compared to traditionally white institutions, both public and private. So our HBCUs are dealing with students who are more likely to qualify for low income financial aid. And then also when you look at federal loans, so traditionally students will take out federal loans to cover any other cost associated with higher education beyond tuition. So we're talking about room and board, we're talking about rent, we're talking about books, computers, and all the other things that are associated with higher education. So these are typically things, expenses that the family takes on for students who are headed off to higher education. But once again, there's a disparity between institutions. So students at HBCUs are more likely to have to take out loans to cover those expenses as compared to students who go to traditionally white institutions. The percentage of students at private and public HBCUs who take out federal loans, this is our last group of bar graphs here, is higher than the percentage of students at traditionally white institutions for paying for those same books and other living expenses. So overall, what we have here is a picture of HBCUs and their students fighting both disparities of race and also socioeconomic status while still contributing overall to Tennessee's higher education landscape. And so we'll see on this next slide, in recent years, 1 in 4 Black students at a 4-year institution went to an HBCU in Tennessee. That total enrollment across all HBCUs is right around 12,000 students. This is a significant portion of Tennessee's higher education sector altogether that end up at one of Tennessee's HBCUs. So in conclusion, HBCUs are a vital and crucial part of reaching the state's higher education completion goals. Not only is it necessary for HBCUs to be successful, but the state needs these schools to excel at what they do. Since HBCUs touch all sectors, public, private, exempt, and non-exempt institutions, it is extremely important, and this is why we are invested in HBCUs as a sector at the state level. So what I want to talk about next is a little bit about what we have done in the inaugural years of the HBCU Success Initiative at THEC. And then we'll move into what the future of HBCU innovation and success will look like across the state. So in our first year, HBCU Success has been in existence since roughly 2018. The statutory legislation was passed in 2017, and we began work in 2018. So these are a few of the projects and initiatives and programs that we have undertaken over the last 2.5 years or so. So under the research and analysis umbrella, one of the things that we have done and we worked diligently on is creating an HBCU website that serves as the front porch, if you will, for HBCUs across Tennessee. With students now more than ever relying on Google and other search engines to find out information about higher education and their options and their choices for college, THEC is proud to maintain a centralized HBCU website that contains information on all of Tennessee's HBCUs, and yes, that includes Knoxville College. We work with data collection, so we collect data from a variety of resources, and we put together reports on institutional characteristics and trends in both enrollment and also faculty, staff, and administration in order to paint a broad picture of Tennessee's HBCUs for policymakers, for students and their families, and then also for the community to encourage engagement with HBCUs. And then finally, we maintain a policy database. So one of the great things about being the first state involved and engaged in this work is that we are now able to monitor other states as they begin to do work like this, similar to this, for their HBCUs. So although Tennessee is not the state with the most HBCUs, we do right now have the most focus on our HBCUs, and we are monitoring that focus across other states, including Florida, Georgia, and Alabama, as our sister states that are engaged in similar work. So in addition to research analysis, we've also been developing programs that are targeted specifically at engaging our HBCUs with one another and cross collaboration across the state. So one of my first acts as director of HBCU Success was securing about $500,000 to fund the 2019 Summer Bridge program across the state. All of our HBCUs with residential students were able to receive grant dollars in order to start, maintain, and support summer bridge programs for their first year incoming students in order to get them off to a strong, steady start before their first year. These summer bridge programs saw an increase in student retention and success, which was around 33% nationwide. Our Tennessee HBCU summer bridge programs saw a retention of over 90% across all schools, and it was as high as 100% at some schools. So we were very pleased, and we are now working to get these grant dollars included in the state budget as a recurring source of support and income for our institutions, and particularly those students in their first year as they transition onto campus. Another program that is ongoing that we have been very excited to participate in is our consulting and our executive and residence program. So through this program, THEC staff, state staff, are able to work directly with institutional staff on institutional problems, such as enrollment, retention, academic advising, and so on. So in 2018, we worked with Lane College directly, and currently we're working with Lemoyne-Owen College with their executive team, including their presidents and vice presidents, to develop ways to ensure that they have a strategic enrollment management plan, and that they're reaching out to the right students in order to grow their enrollment overall, which is especially timely work as we face and as we see the effects of this global pandemic that is ongoing and that continues to disproportionately affect our communities, our African American communities. And then finally, in addition to research and then programmatic development, we have also worked on coordinating and convening key stakeholders and policy groups to inform them around HBCU initiatives and issues of particular importance. So we have a statewide advisory board for our HBCU Success initiative. This is a group of individuals who were appointed by the Tennessee General Assembly and the Tennessee Higher Education Commission to serve as a lay board that both gives advice, guidance, and direction to our HBCUs on areas of importance, whether that's new academic programming to connecting with resources for PPE, to connecting with storage opportunities for students who were displaced because of the Nashville tornadoes and hurricanes. So this group meets twice a year, and in fact, we'll be meeting next week, convening for its second regularly scheduled meeting for this year in order to talk about best ways to support our HBCUs across the state. That advisory board also includes the presidents of each HBCU initiative. So we're making sure to include our HBCUs at every level of decision making as we talk about what works best for them. Another coordination, a convening that I'm extremely proud of is that we have now sponsored the second annual HBCU Success Day on the Hill, representing the second time in history that all 7 HBCUs were on the Hill at Capitol Hill in Nashville, Tennessee on the same day, representing their schools, representing their colors to our state legislature. And in both cases, we had the governor come by. So very exciting time in Tennessee for HBCUs. We're increasing their accessibility. We're increasing their profile. We are making sure that they are visible to the people who matter and the people that make decisions. And yeah, happily, we had our first ever presidential forum this past February, where Dr. Keith Lindsay was not only a participant, but a leader in the discussion on what the future will look like for HBCUs across the state. And I am super proud of my hometown college, my East Tennessee College, holding it down during this very visible day of action on the Hill. And then finally, we have a student success collaborative made up of HBCU faculty and administrators that gets together virtually at this point to talk about strategies that best serve the student body in the best ways to ensure that our students at our HBCUs are successful and that we're using our resources to their maximum potential for those students. So this is sort of looking back, our year in review, and sort of where we are right now. So I'd like to end this talk with a look ahead, a look to the future, the keys for what HBCU success will be as we move forward and as we look beyond these unprecedented times that we find ourselves in. This is sort of my envision, what I envision our HBCUs will be able to accomplish together as a consortium, as a collaborative across the state. So our next slide has a high-level picture on what I consider to be the keys to Tennessee's HBCU success, not just for the year 2020, but beyond as we move further into the future. Next slide. It begins with cultivating a policy environment at both state and federal levels that is conducive and responsive to the unique needs of our HBCUs and our students. This means ensuring that there is access to state programs such as institutional grants, scholarship programs for all of our HBCUs, regardless of whether they are public or private. This looks like telling the right data stories to inform policy. So when our legislators are in session and they're making these decisions that affect all of higher education, making sure they have the right data in their hands and the data that's telling the correct story to inform those policy decisions. And finally, this looks like building a strong coalition of HBCU supporters across all industries, across government, business, alumni, community partners, making sure that Tennessee has a loud, unified, vocal voice that speaks up for HBCUs and their students at both the state and federal levels, making sure that we're participating in those policy decision making, making sure that we're voting for the right people who will support our HBCUs, and also holding our lawmakers accountable to our HBCUs in addition to the students and the constituents they serve. Our next slide talks about the next key of success, and that focuses on peer collaboration, and particularly capitalizing on the strength of the collective, the strength that lies in the numbers in our collective group of institutions. Again, Tennessee does not have the most number of HBCUs across the country, but collectively our institutions represent 12,000 students, and there is strength in those numbers. So capitalizing on this strength looks like forming intentional communities of practice around student success and administrative issues, This looks like establishing a consortium and developing and supporting that consortium of institutions so that we have a place to incubate and disseminate innovative ideas. If something is working great at Lane College, then we want to make sure that everyone from Lemoyne to Fisk to American Baptist back to Knoxville College has access to those innovative ideas and that we are sharing them in a way that all of our institutions are benefiting. As they say, when the tide rises, all ships should rise. And HBCUs really are connected together in that tide. Our next slide, our next key of success is centered around institutional governance. So as we're moving across these keys, we are also getting closer and closer to that institutional and individual level. So institutional governance looks at fostering an optimal shared governance within each institution that allows for maximal growth and innovation. So this means making sure that as a state, we are offering learning and development opportunities for our HBCU trustees, because those boards of trustees are really the center, the locus of decision making for each individual campus. So I am proud and honored to have been included at the Knoxville College HBCU Trustee Summit this past May, and I've also worked with the trustees of our other HBCUs, and so we are working together to make sure that our trustees are learning from leading experts across the country, bringing in the right people to ensure that our schools have access to the best of the best. That looks like sharing statewide and national data, making sure that trustees and also school administration have context to make those sound decisions. And then finally, serving as a thought partner for both boards and presidents. So as we look forward to the future, as we look forward to the next age of higher education, it is important that we at THEC and also across the state are working together and being thought partners for our institutions so that no institution is operating on an island, so that none of our institutions is operating in a vacuum. We want to make sure that all of our institutions feel as though they are being entirely supported, not only by their communities and their alumni, but also by the state of Tennessee, because the success of all of our colleges is really what drives our completion agenda and drives the economic prosperity of the entire state. My final key for success as I land the plane and open up to any questions, comments that you may have, that central key to HBCU success lies in innovation. And what that innovation is a willingness to try often and to learn quickly, to be adept, the ability to discern and adapt to the changing needs, not only of students, but also employers and the economy. Innovation means holding on to tradition and also creating new traditions to ensure future sustainability of our institutions. HBCUs were born out of an environment of necessity. HBCUs were born out of an environment of innovation. And it is up to us, the current generation, as the stewards of our HBCUs, to ensure that we are establishing traditions to make sure that our schools are going to be successful for the future. Our ancestors set us up for the success that we see today, and it is now on us. It is incumbent upon us to ensure that we are ready to innovate to ensure that future sustainability. My next slide takes a look at what that innovation might look like for HBCUs and their stakeholders. So at the institutional level, that means developing responsive academic programming, developing degree programs that students need and employers want to ensure that they will be hired as soon as they graduate. That looks like alumni participation, but also advocacy. As HBCU alumni, we are often the first interaction that communities have with HBCUs. And it's important for us to be embracing that innovation and to be the cheerleaders for HBCUs as they innovate through new spaces. That looks like pioneering student success programs. So as we saw in previous slides, our HBCUs are some of the hardest working institutions across the state. It's time for us to step up and show these other schools how it's done. No one else has that secret sauce of education like HBCUs do. And it's time for us to patent that secret sauce and to pioneer that secret sauce. Other schools should be coming to us as HBCUs on how to best educate these students, and we can absolutely do that. That's through smart collaboration, unique partnerships, going to thinking outside the box, not going to the same well, but finding different wells, different sources of inspiration, and then finally pursuing those niche markets and niche technologies. So really getting in where we fitting in, taking a look at the unique spaces that HBCUs embody and our unique students and our unique capabilities to serve those markets and really capitalizing on that and growing our presence in those markets. So this is where I see HBCUs in Tennessee, across Tennessee, really coming together in the future and really coalescing around this idea of success through innovation at the various levels. And I am so excited and I am super optimistic about the future of all our HBCUs from Tennessee State to Knoxville College. So I'll end with my final slide that has my contact information. My name is Dr. Brittany Mosby. I am the Director for HBCU Success. You can reach me at the email address on your screen and also at my number here in Nashville, 615-253-8874. I would love to hear from you as alumni. I would love to hear from you as community partners on the best way to support our HBCUs and our students, our faculty, and our administration as we look forward to the year 2020 and beyond. Thank you so much for having me. Happy homecoming. Happy homecoming to the class of 1990. I know tonight is your special night. And happy homecoming to all the classes ending with zero and all the classes of Knoxville College. I'm so honored that you have me here tonight. And I look forward to continuing to celebrate with you throughout this week. And I look forward to celebrating with you in person in weeks to come.